I once told a 5-star general, cross your I's and dot your T's. Welcome to episode 3 of the DevOps Roundup podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about your CI/CD pipelines, but more specifically, we want to jump a little bit deeper into understanding the history, the culture, what people don't talk about, right? The maybe the dark side of CI/CD and how it all folds into the DevOps process. But before we get into the conversation, make sure you smash the subscribe button, hit that like button. And Sean, welcome to episode 3.
Oh, thank you, Alex. So yeah, with CI/CD, let's just jump right into it. How did we get to continuous integration and continuous?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out what is continuous integration and then this continuous delivery and deployment. Because I think just the definition of those 4 letters can cause so much chaos.
Yeah, well, and especially the CD portion of it could mean multiple things.
It's almost like a PM, right? With your product manager, project manager.
Exactly.
Program manager.
Project, program. Yeah. So with CD, usually I see it as continuous delivery, but it could be continuous deployment. And then what's the difference between a deployment and a delivery?
That is the mystery of the world, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think multiple people define it different ways. The way I see it is deployment is delivering your code to a location. A delivery is that location has to be customer facing.
But how is that not a deployment?
It is a deployment. So deployment and delivery are basically the same thing. You use the word delivery if it's going to be customer facing. You use the word deployment if it's going to a test site or a storage location.
You're deploying throughout the process, but you really only deliver at the end.
Exactly. Now, it depends on how you define your customer. Your customer could be the paying customer, which is the typical definition of it, but it could also be the test team. So you're deploying to a storage location, you're deploying to a test instance, but when that test instance is actually being handled by a test team, it could be the delivery. Most people don't care about this nuance. Usually I don't even care about this level of nuance on it, but that's how I typically see it. If you're defining it as a delivery, you're handing it to somebody. Think of like a pizza delivery or
mail delivery.
Or mail delivery. A deployment means you're putting it somewhere. So like a deployment could be, if we're going with the mail carrier analogy, the deployment is dropping it off at the mailbox or at the post office. The delivery is when they deliver it to the person it's addressed to.
That makes a lot of sense then too, because like I've struggled with this over the last 10 years of trying to figure out a good definition for the D in CI/CD.
You're looking for the D. That's not a really great quote.
No. I wasn't looking for the D. I was looking for an understanding of the D.
Of the D. Yes, you want a D understanding.
You ever watch when Tesla came out with their dual motor?
No. Catch me up on that.
Yeah. So when Tesla came up with dual motors, like back in 2014, Elon was like on a rampage of like, the D is coming, and he was like hyping up the D. And then like moments later, he's like, just found out what that meant.
That sounds like it should be an episode of Silicon Valley or something.
Yeah. So, but yeah. He was like, he kind of like did that whole little Homer Simpson thing when he goes back into the bushes.
Going back.
Yeah, like, never mind. Now I know what this is. Scratch the last 20 tweets.
That's hilarious. No, I missed that when that was happening.
Yeah, that was at least 11 years ago. I still remember that dual motor. It's different. It has a little bit more pull. It's got a little bit more kick.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my Tesla has a emblem on the back saying dual motor. So,
and that's when they added more letters to the statement.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we know what the D in CI/CD stands for, what is the significance of the I then?
So that's continuous integration. So that's completely different from your delivery or your deployments. So that's basically when you have multiple people working on the same project, when they're committing their code into their Git repository. How often does that code get integrated together? So you're on your branch, I'm on my branch. How often do we integrate that together to do a component build or a system build? And that's continuous integration. So in the previous episode, we were talking about when you learned about nightly builds, and a nightly build is a type of continuous integration.
But you're not deploying anything in that build per se.
Now, the not necessarily. You could be, but the key part of the CI portion is you are compiling with other people's changes. You're integrating your changes with the rest of the team, and you're possibly testing it. So once you have a pipeline, you could be deploying it to a test system or anything like that, but you're not necessarily deploying it to a final system. You're doing the minimum that you need to do to prove that your code works.
Yeah, just cross some T's.
Yeah. Dot your I's, cross your T's. Yeah.
I once told a 5-star general, cross your I's and dot your T's. He just looked at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, never mind me. I don't know what I'm talking about.
But
okay, anyway, so we got a good understanding of CI/CD.
Yeah. Now, how did we get to where CI/CD is today? CI really started out as build automation, and then you started, expanding beyond just automating your builds. You started adding unit tests in there. You started adding lint testing, and then eventually
static code analysis.
And so at that point, you now needed something like a pipeline, or you needed a pipeline-like tool that could take it from, your compiled to your linking to your packaging to your unit tests and your SAS and DAS, and then eventually to, I need this to go somewhere that we can run automated tests on it. Not only unit tests, but also higher level functional tests.
But prior to all this, F5 was your best friend, right?
F5 on the keyboard.
Yeah, F5 on the keyboard. Microsoft Visual Studio, compile, build your code locally.
Oh yeah, okay. You're going back to the Microsoft slant. Yes. So
I'm from the Microsoft. I'm a Microsoft.
Yeah. So back then, people still use Visual Studio. I don't know why I said back then, but yeah, that's
VS Code is really like one of the key tools in the marketplace today. Although I wouldn't call it Visual Studio because it's a much different experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, F5 was mapped to the build key, but build is just the first part of your pipeline.
And it used to happen just locally.
Very often, it was locally. All depends on the organization you're working for.
I mean, even still today, you still build locally, right? Before you even consider doing your CI part.
I would say most organizations are set up that way, that you build locally before you commit. You should. That's best practice.
Yeah, which is why I love that T-shirt of it. It works on my machine.
Yeah.
There's no better place to test than on your local machine.
Yeah. But depending on the organization, your local machine just may be a dumb terminal that's connecting to a server. And so, while you're truly building local in your own IDE, which is what Visual Studio really is, you're typically firing off some sort of CI tool. The vast majority of them in the early days was all Jenkins. And then that would run that whole pipeline that we described a couple times already.
And correct me if I'm mistaken, right? But part of that integration build is now kind of folding in the JFrog stuff with Artifactory.
Yeah, the more we're going towards a Git-based version control system, and almost everyone's using GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, you need some place to throw those intermediate files. So once you compile something, it becomes an object or a binary. You need to park it somewhere, and you can no longer park it in your version control system like we used to be able to. Artifactory is the clear leader in the industry as far as a repository for binaries.
Yeah. And our JFrog making this tool, I think they have some breaking news, don't they, that we want to share with the world here?
Yeah, there's a number of interesting things that are happening at our friends over at JFrog. Without this becoming a complete JFrog commercial here, so they have an annual user conference that happens in September, and they've just announced, like within the last week, registration's completely open for Swamp Up, and I've been dancing around this particular announcement. But thanks for bringing that up. But yeah, release team. I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but Release Team is my consulting company, and we are being spotlighted by JFrog for the month of May. So.
What is this? Is there a benefit? Do you get a trophy, sticker?
Well, I'm sure I'll get some stickers, maybe a T-shirt, but we're getting some promotion. We do a lot of services around Artifactory, a few or a slightly lesser amount around advanced security. Advanced security is their security product, but excuse me, I've been coughing a lot. So we resell JFrog products and provide services around them. Like I was talking about when we're talking about CI/CD, the vast majority of our customers are using Artifactory. So we'll go in to help a company with GitLab services or Atlassian services, and more often than not, they have a need for Artifactory. Either they're already using Artifactory, or we introduce Artifactory to the client. Which is the main tool. And we try to bring along advanced security as well as a lot of benefits to tie security in at the binary level, as well as in the pipeline. And advanced security does that very well. So yeah, I guess that's the big announcement that you were leaning towards, and I was going for even more important announcements like the ML announcement.
Oh yeah, well, let's get into that one too.
So that is really interesting, and I think there's a semi-natural segue to talk about the life cycle management in machine learning. So like if you take DevOps and apply it to the data scientists who are creating the large language models and all this. It applies very well. For a long time, there hasn't been the same level of discipline in the data sciences versus the software development. So software development over the years has been very disciplined. We've created things like Agile and Safe, and then there's a lot of things between Waterfall and Agile, incremental development and all that. Not necessarily the same for data scientists. But now that it's extremely important in AI, because almost all the AI stuff, there's some software development in it. Don't get me, I'm not saying that. But the majority of what feeds the large language model is coming from data scientists. They're the ones that are massaging the data and feeding the large language models. It makes a lot of sense for them to start adopting software principles, the software development lifecycle. Yes, they're not necessarily writing code, but the inputs to these models are just as important as source code. So if you start controlling it with something like Artifactory, which is what the big announcement here is for JFrog with their ML for AI modeling. It just makes a lot of sense. The one of the concerns is the majority of these large language models are stored in some sort of like data lake. Those data lakes are just sitting in like an S3 bucket or some sort of on-prem large storage. Not a lot of control. If you lose something, yeah, you could probably get it out of a backup or something like that. But if bad data gets put into the large language model, how do you roll that back? How do you identify what changed in your large language model? And how do you roll that back?
I don't know that you have an easy way of doing it.
Yeah, well, you would if you had Artifactory.
Okay.
Because Artifactory is going to record every change in that model, and you're going to be able to roll things back or jump forward or slice and dice the model exactly the way you want to.
It's an interesting problem that they're solving, because this is one that in the Atlassian world, as they're doubling down on AI, I've had very similar concerns, right? Because with their announcement of Robo and their integrations with their Teamwork Graph, what happens when you have malicious intent, right? And so AI, I don't think AI is smart enough to detect this was a bad actor that gave me this data. It just sees data, right?
I agree. I don't think it's at that level yet. Ultimately it probably will be, but I don't think it's. I have the same concern, and how much of the hallucinations are because of bad data. I think all of them are. That it's not making this stuff up. We're misusing the word hallucination, but it's finding these answers in the large language model, or it's making the wrong assumptions. But the data is there, so
right.
So like take example with Rovo, if it's listening or if it's consuming my Confluence site. So when I'm asking it question, it questions. It's giving us answers based on what's in my Confluence, which is exactly what I want to do. If I have somebody that jumps in and creates a bunch of Confluence pages that it's all garbage and it's just made up stuff, and no one catches that, Rovo catches it, and all of a sudden it starts answering based off those things.
It almost starts feeling like, wasn't there a crime like way back in the day where somebody was stealing the pennies from every ATM transaction? And like you couldn't tell because it was a penny.
Yeah. So that was the plot of Office Space, as well as Superman 2 or Superman 3.
So it's kind of the same idea, right? Somebody could very innocently, or I wouldn't say innocently, it could appear innocently, but still very maliciously. You drop little certain things here and there where to the naked eye it might not look malicious, but to AI
it's catch it. Yeah.
But because AI is using it as a model or as it's an ingestion, then it knows or is aware of it.
So last year you were trying to make a term catch on, and I can't remember what it was. And you were mentioning so you're trying to make something catch on, and it was in your other podcast, which I frequent as a commenter, and I kept saying, no, that's never going to catch on. It's never going to catch on. You could make that catch on by, in a Confluence page, or
dropped it enough times.
Every so often, drop it in some other context, and then Rovo is going to pick up on that and say, hey, this acronym means this, when it clearly doesn't. It's just something that you want to catch on.
Yeah. Right now, my new one is the Jira Life Never Dies.
Jira Life Never Dies.
Okay. I'm very Cobra Kai inspired.
I have not been watching that.
Really great show on Netflix. If I don't watch a whole lot of Netflix, but Cobra Kai is one of the ones that I have on my list.
No, I've basically stopped watching scripted content. I just watch.
Come over to my show and watch the Jira Life.
I just watch things on YouTube. I subscribe to a lot of things on YouTube, and it gives me more than enough content that I other than the nightly news, I never switch over to a real TV channel, or I should cancel all my streaming services because I never watch them.
So let's peel back a little bit, though, talking about CI/CD and maybe merging this whole LLM and
Yeah, get back
JFrog.
to our topic. Yes.
Yeah, but putting it together, right? Like, I think my 2 cents, right? There's a technical aspect of all of this, right? Setting up CI/CD for the first
Mhm.
time, understanding the impacts of it, understanding the impacts of setting up AI in your company and how
Mhm.
your team's using it, right? But I think if we can pull back, right, and not talk about the tool, but talk about culture. What have you seen through your career as teams want to adapt or buy into the CI/CD life, right? Like, what cultural challenges do most companies run into?
So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. um,
Well, let's start at the top.
yeah. So it depends on how DevOps is being introduced to a company, or how CI/CD is being introduced into a company.
And to be clear, though, DevOps is the whole thing. CI/CD is a portion of the whole of DevOps.
CI/CD is a very important tool in the DevOps toolbox. So it's probably one of the more used tools in the. So it's considered your high-end socket set in your toolbox.
But
um,
but in it, you also have like your Git
yeah,
repo,
your
your
version
SVN.
control portion. So the CI/CD pipeline pretty much ties most of the tools together. It's probably not necessarily tying the IDE in there, but sometimes you kick off the pipeline from inside your IDE,
Mhm.
going back to your whole F5.
Yeah, because even with Jira, you'll see the results of the CI/CD in Jira. So it's
Yes.
all intermingled somehow.
Yeah. So a lot of times, multiple places throughout your pipeline, you may be reporting back to Jira on, hey, this failed, or this passed, or whatever, or even reporting back to Confluence. So you have a dashboard of, hey, these are where all my pipelines are, especially if you are building multiple different things in your organization. Um, but what was the original question?
The culture, like, what are the biggest challenges? Because I don't think
Oh, okay, yeah.
so,
Back to the
there's a
culture.
couple of challenges when you're rolling out CI/CD. There's a few challenges. There's technical ones and there's non-technical ones. I've been in
Mhm.
conversations where is it Jenkins? Is it TeamCity? Is it Circle
Yeah,
CI?
yeah,
Which one do we want?
mhm,
Right? Is it GitHub Actions? Is it GitLab? Is it
yeah.
Bitbucket pipelines? Right? Like,
Mhm.
there's just so many tools to choose from, but that's a layer of conflict and decision making that has to happen.
It can become a religious war on which tool to pick,
Right?
and
But
I try to avoid religious wars. Um, Huge religious wars in the IDE, which IDE should be the standard in our development group, and it depends on what you're developing. But which version control tool are we going to use? Are we going to go GitHub or GitLab?
yeah,
Back in the days,
but to make the decision for all that, you have an underlying cultural problem that
mhm.
you should probably work on first.
Yeah. How do you organize your teams? Is the software developer going to be the one responsible for creating a CI/CD pipeline, or is it? Are you going to stand up an application or a software development tool group? Which is one of the things I started out as specializing in the 90s. I started forming software development tool organizations at different companies, and then that's why I spun out my own company to do just that. And then we got quickly embedded in things like Atlassian and GitLab and GitHub for that. But who's in charge of creating this? Often software definitely is very invested in what you set up and how you set it up,
Yeah,
how you maintain it. You
but
really should be
most of
doing
the
infrastructure
time,
as code for all
right?
this.
But most of the time, it's your IT department that has to maintain it after it's been set up.
Sometimes, and usually IT departments don't want anything to do with applications. They're like, yeah, we'll take care of the servers and maybe the network if you're lucky, maybe the mail server and like DNS and stuff. But when it comes to software development applications, most IT departments want a divorce from
They
that.
want to wash their hands from that
They want
problem.
to wash their hands, and that's where you get into, a DevOps team, which I'm completely against DevOps teams. I don't think creating so DevOps is supposed to be getting rid of silos. So you shouldn't create a new silo and call it DevOps. Um, and so many companies do. In fact, like, I don't know, 9 out of 10 of my current clients do that kind of stuff. And it goes into another conversation that we should have in another episode about, is there such a thing as a DevOps engineer? And I'm going to argue no, they should not.
I was like, I hope there is, because I've been adding it as a tag to all our shorts.
Well, it's probably good for SEO, but they should not be a DevOps engineer.
So I used to be.
They should be a CI/CD engineer. They should be an automation engineer. They should be a platform engineer. But a DevOps engineer, no, that doesn't make any sense. Just like a DevOps team doesn't make any sense.
But why? Is it because it should just be rolled under the responsibility of the engineer?
Exactly. It should be roles. It could be your primary role, but it should be roles under regular engineers. So.
Yeah. So one of the, so I worked in a couple of different teams, and one of the teams that I worked at, I was a software engineer, but my role as a software engineer was to do the DevOps portion of the thing. So I had a very minimal software engineering role and a much bigger DevOps type of role.
Mm-hmm.
And another team in another company that I worked at, I was part of a dedicated DevOps team that was all titled software engineers, but we managed all the DevOps applications like Jira, Bitbucket, Bamboo, all of that.
So it is okay to have a team like that. That makes perfect sense, especially the larger the organization you have. But it's not really a DevOps team. That is more of an application administration team. So you're the administrator of all the different tools. You will help you'll help the products or projects adopt the tools and use the tools, as well as being the administrator for it. But you're not necessarily dictating the DevOps practices that the different teams should use.
Right.
So some people may say that we're defining it too narrowly here, or cutting it too thinly. But yeah, you don't want to get into the point where that becomes a silo, because you want to break that down.
Yeah, because the biggest struggle that I see from now back to a cultural perspective is that, because you're basically the IT for the department, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that causes more friction than it helps.
It does.
When you start siling it out. Yeah. Your DevOps process should really be something that all your engineers care about, because part of the DevOps experience is the well-being of your code base, right? And it's everybody's responsibility. It's a shared responsibility. And it shouldn't just be on one team or one individual that's the poor person that has to build those pipelines out for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So the core of what I see DevOps is a set of policies, tools, and people that are helping get the project from cradle to grave as quickly as possible, and as least friction as possible. As soon as you start making a centralized tool team, then the opportunity for friction increases. They all start with the best of intentions. We want to standardize usage across all teams that use these tools. We want to have a core set of tools for everybody. So every project's not Wild West using all their tools. But that team will tend to become less responsive than if the projects are doing it themselves, because it creates a silo. Not all processes fit all projects. So very quickly, if you're saying, hey, all my Jira projects, to use Jira as an example, has to use this template. It has to be cookie cutter. You're using the same workflow, you're using the same screens, you have to use the same fields. As a Jira admin, that makes perfect sense. And I can get in line with that. But at the project level, your project might have slightly different procedures for whatever reason, that you can't use the cookie cutter Jira project. You need to maybe report metrics on something that other projects don't even have, you know, or you have an additional set of gates that your product has to go through that nobody else does. So now you have to get a one-off workflow. And then if you don't have your own, a Jira admin assigned to you, you have to go to the corporate team and get in line with the rest of the users and try to get prioritized. And ultimately it doesn't work. It becomes a bottleneck and just slows things down.
Let's take a little break to hear a message from our sponsor.
So Release Team, DevOps tool specialists. We provide professional services and software reselling around the leading software DevOps tools like Atlassian, GitLab, GitHub, JFrog, and others. To talk with us about DevOps, here's our contact information. Please call 866-887-0489 or via email at info@releaseteam.com.
And we're back from our snack break.
Yes, it was very, very great snack break.
You know what? That's one of my favorite things now. Wherever I go, we're looking for snacks, and it's like, what snack was Sean like?
So like I'm influencing you on snacks. That's good.
You have to judge the quality of a tech conference based on its snacks.
You do, and the most recent tech conference that we were both at was Atlassian. What would you rate their snack game at this?
It's gone so far down over the years.
I would say it was slightly better than Vegas's. The last year in Vegas, but not a lot better.
I wasn't too over the top. 2023 team, they had like this lady that had like these chocolate balls that they would put chocolate over and it melt and there was stuff in it. It was almost like hot chocolate. But
I think that was a vendor that was doing that though. I don't think that was
conference. No, that was in the middle in the hallways and in between all the booths. Yeah. And they had tables of shrimp and they had tables of like the wall of candy at Bash, and like,
that was incredible. And
there was a lot of awesome stuff.
They really need to bring the wall of candy back. If any Atlassians listening, we really need the wall of candy back.
Yeah,
so
we do.
Not taking up too much time on Atlassian here, but the best bash they've ever had was at Mandalay Bay. And
I heard there was a pool party or something like that.
Oh yeah, it was incredible, and we won't go into too much, but they have not surpassed that bash yet, and that was the last one before the pandemic.
So 2019.
No, not 99.
You go 20 years.
Yeah, I just jumped 20 years back by mistake. So there is an invisible time traveler that's chasing me. So
that would explain the TARDIS behind you.
Yeah. So, but anyway, before we went on a snack break, what were we
were wrapping up culture, right? And so I think the next topic that I probably want to talk about is kind of technical debt. I think there's a little overlay with technical debt, not in a traditional coding perspective, but when companies making the move to CI/CD, they have to make a decision to either leave stuff behind or adapt new ways of life. And so over your years of experience, like what have you seen? What's the biggest challenge? What's the biggest decision that companies have to make when they start committing to the CI/CD roadmap?
Yeah. So completely different answer depending on if we're talking about a culture that's on-prem, like your data center type versus ones that have adopted the cloud. So adopting the cloud kind of not eliminates technical debt, but it lessens it quite a bit because now you have other organizations that are taking care of the back end for you. With on-prem, the biggest challenges we used to have with technical debt is we need to upgrade a particular application, but that application talks to a database. And the new version of the application doesn't talk to the version of the database that we have or no longer supports that vendor database. So you have to move from like a like a DB2 to an Oracle or something like that. That is gone in the cloud. We don't have to worry about that anymore. But that's
There's
the
a word
technical
for
debt.
that, though. No, there's a technical word for when something gets obsolete.
Well, OBE is pretty much what we would use, but that's an abbreviation for obsolete.
No, like when you're depending on on a piece of hardware that just doesn't
It's a
exist.
dependency. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a different word.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I have to go look it up, but there's a word when you built an entire stack on some technology and that technology just is obsolete now because you're not obsolete, but that thing is obsolete. That vendor product is obsolete. There's a specific term that I've used in the industry to call this out.
Yeah. So typically we would encounter technical debt. Like we'd go into a customer site and they have to upgrade from Linux 9 to Linux 11 or something like that. And we find out, okay, well, the applications won't work that they have. So we have to upgrade the applications. Then the database doesn't work. And then there's some sort of dependency that they're using, like, maybe the web stack or something that also is no good. And we have to upgrade that just to be able to upgrade the OS. And so it just snowballs, and without dealing with the technical debt as it arises, like we should have upgraded this product, 3 years ago. So now the upgrading the OS is not that big of a deal, or we should have moved off the security tool because it's end of life. So that's the typical technical debt that we would see a lot on prem. And so we can actually tie this back to JFrog. They wrote a very decent book prior to the pandemic called Liquid Software, and it basically was an approach to eliminate technical debt, because the software changes would just flow down like liquid, and get applied as they were available, which is pretty much what all SaaS vendors are doing. Like Atlassian Cloud, their tools are just being updated whether we like it or not in the cloud. Like the new navigation features that just rolled out this week that I can't stand right now. I'll probably grow to love them, but
dude, I'm telling you, I was telling you in the green room here, just in Jira, when I go into an app settings, well, in any Jira settings now, whenever you go to the gear and you go to Jira settings, it used to be that you could see projects and filters and stuff on the top, so you can go from the Jira admin setting back into your project. Well, because all of that's now on the left-hand side, it gets replaced. So there's an arrow that says back to Jira, except that button doesn't work.
What is it? Does it just not work, or does it
doesn't do anything? I'm clicking on it all day long, and it's just like it won't go back. And
how many times do you click before you give up?
I click 3, and so what I end up doing is I click on the little grid and I jump back into Jira. So now I'm back at the Jira landing page, but that doesn't feel right.
Yeah. So that's an example of Liquid Software. They were able to roll that out to all their cloud customers without us having to do a damn thing. At first there was a opt in or opt out, but I think it's you can't opt out anymore at some particular point. It's possible you can with the nav. I haven't gone and looked if I can reset it back, but yeah, that's an example of Liquid Software. And the whole purpose there is to not have to worry about technical debt. But it really only works in the cloud. There's no real way to, do you really want your software vendor pushing updates down to your on-prem software?
No, probably not.
How do they know which database I chose? How do they know what version of the database or what packages or updates I've done to the database or whatever third party integrations I may have turned on, that I don't want to go in on Monday morning and find out that I don't want to just surprise vendor XYZ, because I don't want to keep picking on poor Atlassian. Just pushed some change, and the policies or procedures that you've been using for 2 years are no longer possible because of this new change that they thought was a good idea.
Yeah. But by the way, DMS, diminishing manufacturing sources, is the word I was looking for.
Well, that's 3 words, but yes, I have heard it referred.
Well, when it's just DMS, it's one.
Yeah, that's an acronym. Yeah.
Whatever. We'll have a whole episode on acronyms versus words.
Oh boy, yeah. So
TLAs, 3-letter acronyms.
A lot of the customers that I serve through my consulting company are the companies that abuse acronyms.
I've been in meetings where the whole meeting's an acronym.
Yeah, and you're like, what the hell is everyone talking about?
Well, I mean, unless you do know what everybody's talking about, then it makes it more fun.
Yeah. Well, I've been in some of those meetings, and I make up acronyms when it's my turn to talk, just to see if anyone calls me out on it. And there's been times that no one calls me out on it. So I'm like, how many people actually understood the other acronyms that led up to me dropping a few acronyms? Or did my fake acronyms actually mean something to somebody, and they thought I was talking about something?
I'm telling you, I love making up acronyms. I was on a project. We called it Enterprise Lifecycle Management Operations, ELMO.
Okay. ELMO, yeah. Yeah, I worked for a company that almost all the application-based acronyms were types of trees. So Elm was the mail system. Pine was like a command line editor. They had something called Oak, and I don't remember what it did, but everything was a tree-based acronym.
That's cool. That's better. Like I would kind of prefer that over like one of my teams. I just love. I can never know if it's the right one, but I always forget if it's enunciating or pronouncing. But like
I'm terrible at both of those things.
Well, we were on one. The acronym was CDPR, so I was just called the Cadapper.
Cadapper, I like it.
And it's like you never know if you're supposed to read it through or say the letters.
Yeah, but I always read things through. Yeah.
Well, go to Charlotte one day and read its call sign for its airport.
Charlotte, yeah,
it's CLT.
CLT.
So if you were to read CLT, some people need I got to get my head out of the gutter.
I'm going to let you say it out loud instead of.
I'm okay. We'll let the internet say it out loud for themselves.
But yeah, I have been in projects where they go out of their way to make the acronym sound dirty without actually having it spell something dirty.
I mean, you got to have a little bit of fun, and that's when I think those are my favorite Elon Easter eggs. Like, have you ever gone to your Tesla still yet and done the voice command?
I use it pretty much for everything.
So press and hold the right thumb button right on the steering wheel and say open butthole.
Well, you just got a thumb up for that for some reason.
Yeah.
What is it open? Does it open the glove box?
No, it opens the charge port in the back.
Oh, that's what it's calling it. No, I have never tried that. But the biggest thing that annoys me with the Tesla is that big center console. I there's a number of things I want dead set in front of me. And I know there's an aftermarket screen that you can install in the Tesla, but I don't want to spend extra money. I shouldn't have to. It should come with it.
I as much as I love Tesla, I think we should probably dig deeper, because when you're talking about maybe this is a strong word, right? But when you're talking about a model CI/CD, model DevOps citizen, I don't know that anybody does it any better than Tesla. At least at scale in the real world with the amount of cars in their fleet. Because
yeah, Tesla is 100% liquid software. In fact, I was it yesterday? I don't know if I've driven my car anywhere today, but yesterday when I was driving into my client's site, it wanted to do an update, And so I'm like, well, no, you're going to schedule that for 3 a.m. or something. You
Yeah.
don't do it while I'm
But there's a company that I'm assuming they're very, very fond of feature flags,
Uh-huh.
right? Because I'm assuming that they have like they write all the code, but then they target employee cars first. They'll
Sure.
do Elon's car first, then
Well,
employee cars.
I'm assuming that when they schedule an update, they've already downloaded the software to your car, and because you're not scheduling the download. The download's already happened. The only thing you're scheduling is it
The installation.
restarting and turning on those feature flags.
Right.
So
But again, there's a company that you would imagine. So I don't know how much you've seen of Tesla's like simulated environments, right? But like in the physical world, and again the world that we come from, there's a huge physical component to it, and being able to simulate that physical world as much as you can digitally is critical for quality software. Which
sure.
it's not something we've talked about yet, but a huge
No.
implication of DevOps is quality.
Oh yeah. You want to make something. You want to get something to the customer as quickly as possible, but also at the highest quality possible.
Right. At the same time.
At the same time, yes, you want to do both, because you don't want to get garbage out to customers as quickly as possible. You want to get something of value to the customer as quickly as possible. So yeah, there's a whole set of testing topics that we can go into.
Yeah, we're definitely going to discuss them, right? Because simulations and end-to-end testing and endurance testing and regression testing and all the different types of testing that exists out there. And there's the various levels of testing, because there's integration testing at when you're compiling on your machine, right? There's unit level tests and all kinds of tests that we're going to have a few episodes just on testing. But testing is such an integral part of the DevOps process that CI/CD kind of automates certain aspects of it, but there's still, especially when you're in the physical world, like again, the world that most of our folks most of the places that we worked at live in, at the end of the day, you're still physically copying some software on a disk to a piece of hardware.
Yeah, it's going somewhere, whether it's an automated process that hardware is connected through the internet, or or sneaker netting it to somewhere.
Yeah,
you're putting something somewhere.
And what are your thoughts of Netflix's like chaos engineering? Have you heard of their concept of chaos?
I'm a big fan of chaos engineering, and I'm not 100% sure it started at Netflix. I think it started somewhere else, but Netflix does it a lot.
They're the ones that took it and ran with it.
Yeah, exactly. I would give them credit for that. I'm trying to think of the first place I heard it. It was probably at one of the DevOps World conferences, that someone was doing a presentation on chaos engineering, or that was the first time I saw the Chaos Monkey. Are you familiar with the Chaos Monkey?
No, but I've heard of the Panic Monkey.
The Panic Monkey. It's pretty much this. It's similar, yeah. So basically, the Chaos Monkey is someone goes into a data center or some sort of facility, and they do something random and
drop a grenade.
Yeah, and it's up to the operations team to get everything back up and running as quickly as possible. So mitigate the chaos.
So chaos engineering, for those watching at home, is a discipline of experimenting on a system in order to build confidence in the system's capability to withstand turbulent conditions in production, which I would argue is a huge part of the CI/CD part, right? Because I think this is where a lot of companies, I've never seen a company not do this correctly, but I've also never worked like at a Netflix or an Amazon. But most of the companies that I worked on, they have their developer environment that gets kind of tidied up. Docker, I think, facilitates things quite a bit nowadays.
Yeah.
Then they have that nightly build environment, right? That when they do that integration build, there's an ideal environment that they're building against, right? Which again, your other concepts of CI/CD fall into place there. Then we have like our pre-prod and staging environments, right? Where you do such a good job. Most companies, I feel, do a very phenomenal job at going from the developer environment to a almost production environment and getting it through, doing their tasks, crossing their T's, dotting their I's. But for some reason, I've never seen where the production environment is a replica of your staging. There's always some new variable in production.
Close, but yeah.
There's always a new variable in production that you just couldn't account for, and you end up with garbage or not
or
garbage.
something just not necessarily working the way you expect it to work.
Yeah, so you always have a hidden surprise when you push the production, and this is one of the reasons why I got out of IT. Right, I got tired of just like praying.
Well, so that's another aspect of DevOps, not praying, but what you're about to describe or where you're headed with this is the feedback loop, which is very important. It's funny that we got all the way to episode 3 before we talk about the importance of the feedback loop.
Well, we also only said AI twice today too, so
well, that's 3 times now. Yeah, but there's always going to be drift between your testing environments and your prod. But having that feedback loop where someone jumped in to save the day in prod because something wasn't working, and what they did is now going to kill anything else that comes into prod, but they may not be aware of that because they thought they were saving the day. So, maybe it's revving the version of some dependency or something like that, or changing a file name or moving updating a path or something like that. And so the next time, a release is delivered, it's expecting the environment to be exactly what was in test, and now it's not because the path changed or a version of something is different. So if that feedback loop is disconnected or not connected at all, development doesn't know about this change. So you're basically queuing up the train to crash because we don't know the bridge is out.
Which again is I think a victim of, as we go back to culture, right, and creating these silos. Because when your developer doesn't have ownership end to end of this stuff, they don't know about it until the very end.
Yeah.
Which happens to be like, if you're this is why I hate waterfall projects, because you won't know that until 6 months from now.
Well, you're not 100% wrong, but this is where there's a little bit of a misconception there. So waterfall is more of the program management or project management side of things, and not necessarily, it is throwing everything over the wall for the next task. But typically, development to operation is not necessarily throwing it over the wall.
But you don't deliver. But you don't deliver often in waterfall.
Yes, that is where you're completely on for that portion, because
you never find out the real problems until you deliver.
Yeah, if you're not continuously delivering, you don't find out these problems. But the feedback loop is also very important, because when you do find a problem, operation needs to tell development about it, so development can then account for it in the next release. And if it's something simple like a path change or component upgrade or something like that, just let them know, and they can work it into their next release.
But oftentimes, so I have two things to talk about from that perspective, right? Because I've seen 2 different scenarios in my life. One, your developers don't test in production. They push to production.
Yeah. Well, they shouldn't be pushing to production either. Your CI/CD tool should be pushing to production.
But they don't. The developers, like, at least again, physical world that I come from, right? Your developer is going to test the heck out of code on their local simulation or on their whatever environment they have at the developer level. The CI/CD is going to take care of some of it. Your testers or test environment is going to have there's going to be some variance, right? There's always a little bit of a variance, but really your developer never really makes it all the way out to the field.
No, they shouldn't. Yeah.
No, yeah. But because they don't, that person that does find that bug doesn't have the same insight that the developer does.
They don't. No. So sometimes they have better insight because they understand the end environment better than the developer does.
Right. But sometimes the problem is when that tester isn't a developer, at least in background.
Yeah.
Then they don't know how to articulate the problem.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole feedback loop again. And they need to be able to articulate it enough so the feedback loop works.
Except
so if all they say is, "Hey, it ain't working," that's not good enough.
Did I ever tell you? Have you heard of what is it? What, the SPO? Have you ever heard of the SPO? Special Program Office. Special Program Office.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I had one time I was in a meeting with the SPO with like the person that pays the contract, right?
Mhm.
They're sitting next to me and we're going through all the bugs in Jira.
And this is he's talking about government type work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're sitting there, we're reading through all of the bugs in Jira, and we stumble upon a bug that says it doesn't work. I just remember this like super high paid, highly respected government employee goes, huh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I was like, yep. So that was problem one is again that the developer and that final environment are usually not in sync. And
Yes.
oftentimes I see developers go, well, it works on my machine.
Yeah. Well, that's the classic, and the whole thing of DevOps is try to solve that, but sometimes it's not solvable. You can narrow that gap, but if I'm creating something that's going to get deployed to a aircraft carrier, me as a developer, I'm never going to be asked to install that at the aircraft carrier.
But that's what I'm
That
saying is there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
You should have to, right? Like, I feel like again, as much as people may or may not like Tesla, I feel like this is where Tesla is a model citizen here, right? Like Elon is driving, like he's got the latest build on his car,
Mhm.
right? The developer might not, but Elon's got a straight shot straight back to the person writing that code, right?
Yeah. But
And
so to follow the analogy a little bit more, there's no Tesla engineer that's sitting in my car updating. It's getting pushed to my car, and if I have a problem with it, I'm going to have to be the feedback loop to Tesla.
100%. But I
Yeah,
would assume that they have I would assume that Tesla at this point is mature enough where they can spool up all the exact specs of your car in a local car and go test it there,
I would
wh-
assume they do that. Yeah,
which is not
yeah,
something almost any other manufacturer can do.
yeah. I would say that the majority of them try to do that, and depending
Well,
on
now
what,
they have to.
what the drift is between the test environment versus production, and how far away production truly is. So, like if you're talking like let's talk like a radio telescope array, and you may need to deploy software to a dozen locations across the world. My software developer's not getting on a plane and going to
Going
all
at 12.
those
No,
locations.
but they
Um,
need to have and this goes back to like maybe like The Martian, right? Where they, if you remember that movie, they went and like
mhm,
uncovered the rover that they had locally
yeah,
because they have to like there's gotta the developer at some point needs to if I mean it depends on the severity of the bug, right?
sure, yeah,
Like there
but
might be cases where a developer does need to fly out to a location because you tried everything.
yeah. Though that does still happen on those type of projects, but more often than not, you try to automate it. If there's some sort of manual install that has to happen, you would typically have an install team that they may know the development team, but they're not actually a developer themselves, but they're an expert on what the end system needs to look like,
Hmm.
and they understand how to they're typically SAs
Yeah,
that
but
install the system.
but that's my second point that I was going to make from earlier. Because remember earlier I said I had 2 points on the developer
Yeah, and then
tester.
we forgot the
Yeah.
second one.
So the second point then is that because I've seen a lot of problems where, and this is a real world story, right? Where we're testing a robot, everything's
Mhm.
working fine and dandy until about 4 p.m. Things just start crapping out,
Okay.
right? And it turned out to be a memory overflow
Okay.
because you have the machine on for 12 hours or 10
Yeah.
hours, right? By the 11th hour, you're starting to run out of space on that RAM.
Mhm.
And so it's one of the situations where again, if you don't have the right skilled person, you have these
Yeah.
like head scratching bugs where you're like whiskey tango foxtrot, like what the heck's going on?
Yeah.
And there is no logical solution to solve that problem. But this is
Mhm.
where you really got to like intimately know that end product really well.
You do. Yeah. Yeah. Because in that particular scenario, your testers maybe tested that thing for 2 hours tops and never ran into that problem.
Right.
And
Until the
you're
second
lucky.
shift comes in.
You're lucky that it was within a 12-hour window that you started seeing the problems, because if it was at the 72-hour of the robot where all of a sudden it decides to kill everybody else in the amusement park, going back to a Simpsons episode. But you would never find out until it's actually installed at the amusement
Yeah.
park.
But to wrap up the conversation, right, to like why is CI/CD so important? I think CI/CD tries to minimize and help with these
It
problems that
does.
we've been describing, right? And that's the reason why it's becoming an industry standard, why it's such an industry best practice, because you used to have to do these manually, right?
You did, yeah. And the more complex the system, you may have had multiple manual things that all had to come together to make a product work. And now with CI/CD, you can take that multiple project approach and
Yeah.
tie them all together into one CI/CD pipeline.
And Tesla even shows that even when you have a hardware integrated system, which usually requires a physical media, right? Like I got a Honda. If I want a software update, I got to go schedule an appointment to a Honda dealer, and they
Oh
got
yeah,
a disc that they're going to put in that car,
yeah.
right? But
That's the worst.
But Tesla has figured out how to revolutionary, but for everybody else, common sense, update on the field hardware.
I'd be interested so maybe we should see if we can get a tour of Tesla's software development, because I would not be surprised if they weren't following JFrog's book of liquid software, because it definitely sounds like. I don't have evidence that they did. I would not be surprised if they did do that.
Yeah.
Because
No, I
it
think
sounds
it'd
like
be interesting. I think it would be interesting to see, right? Because not to again as much we're starting to sound like Tesla fanboys, but Elon has something there, right? Because
well, Tesla does. I'm not sure I'll credit it directly to Elon, but I
look
don't
at what
know
he
if
did
I
with
would completely take him out either.
yeah. Well, look at what he did with Twitter, right? Like when you fire 2/3 of your staff and you're able to keep a system running with 20 engineers.
Well, it's running, but is it valuable anymore?
No, it's not. But the point still is that the CI/CD and the deployment process and keeping the lights and servers up live still worked when you got rid of the fluff. So
True.
I think there's something to look at on how an Elon run company does software delivery and maintain quality.
Yeah, and hopefully we haven't insulted them enough that they would not invite us in to check out how they're doing
Oh wait,
DevOps.
so what we gotta
I
do?
would be very excited to do that.
No. So this is what we gotta do. So as we wrap this episode up, when Rodney and I were doing the Jira Live, we decided to start with the history of Atlassian, right?
Okay.
And Ronnie and I went through a blog post. I don't know if you remember the good old Monday Coffee folks, Jexo.
Yes, I remember them.
Yeah, they had a blog post that actually walked you through in chronological order the history of Atlassian. So
Okay.
we went to that website and we started like walking down memory lane and doing our little banter that we do on the Jira Life and talked about the history of Atlassian. And like within a day or two, we get a message from Jens Schumacher, and he's like, "That's not all accurate." And I'm like, "Well, who are you?" And he's like, "I was employee number 13. I was there."
Yeah.
I was there when all this happened.
But you guys didn't do separate research. You just took them that blindly.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to get to is like if we like assume so much about Tesla, when Tesla watches this, they're gonna be like, let's go correct them, and they'll voluntarily want to come on because that's what happened with Jens. Like he was like, this is all wrong. Let me go correct you, and then that's how we got him on the Jira Life.
I don't mind being corrected. Let's just keep talking about companies that we would like to, tour their,
their software pipelines.
Software pipelines, yeah. I would love to our favorite company, Disney. So, and I actually kind of know the guy that.
Then we should, I think as we continue to evolve Doru. By the way, do you roll your R's on Doru?
I will now. I don't know if I can roll my R's, but
I told Lena, like, I tell my wife, I'm like, yeah, I got to film an episode of Doru. She's like, what's that? I'm like, the DevOps Roundup. Like, you came up with that? I'm like, no, that was all Sean.
Yeah. It's just another acronym, right?
Yeah. Just another acronym. So anyways, Sean, I think, again, as we continue to evolve this, it would be great to have, software engineers and DevOps engineers, as much as you don't like the term.
So actually, I was going to talk to you about this off camera, but why don't we just do it real quick now here at the end? I'd like to set a goal if we can get to a certain number of subscribers, let's start bringing on guests.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And,
I
let you
think.
pick the number.
Well, I know monetization's at 1,000. Usually, once you monetize, things start getting a little bit more serious. So I'd be very open. Maybe anywhere between the $500 to $1,000 subscriber mark would probably be good enough.
Okay. Well, why don't we go with a lower number? Something
Let's go.
that seems
Once we
more
hit
achievable.
500.
So when we hit 500, we'll start bringing on guests.
So, folks, this is all in your control. So hit that subscribe button right now. And people are starting to watch it. I think our short strategy is working. We're getting good traction on the episodes, and we're going to be chopping these up too to make it more topical, because we know you all don't have an hour and 5 minutes to go through these.
We had an hour and 5 already.
Yeah. So anyways, like I said at the very beginning, you are standing between me and the mouse. So Sean, why don't you wrap us up for today and thank our viewers for being here.
All right, everyone, thank you. And like Alex already said, and says it much better than I do, please like and subscribe. And we'll throw in some links at the end of these and in the description.
Yeah,
So
check out
everybody. See you guys in a week.